Dear friends, good evening and thank you for joining us. This week we continue with our seminar on elemental therapy. And today we're going to continue with the topic on the magic of nature, and this is therapy with elementals. This is a multi-part series where we are going to get well educated on how is it that we can work effectively with all of these divine creatures of nature. Now, as we work with this particular side of the doctrine, there is a word that will consistently be showing up, and that word is arcana. Arcana means mystery. And there is a mystery veiled behind each and every one of these practices that we're going to be putting into use. The reason for that is because there has to be some level of intellectual culture developed so that we can put into effect the right level of discipline when we are working with the elementals of nature. You see, there is a deep responsibility as we start playing in this particular field of magic. And remember that when we are saying magic, we're not making a reference to illusions or to tricks. We're speaking specifically about the ability to influence the forces of nature and through those forces generate effects. So, for that, the mystery that exists behind it is hidden behind the correct ritual. It is the actual connection with the innermost, so that all of these things that are happening, that they manifest only through the exact will of the law and never our will. Because it is very common that the moment that we learn how to work with some plants, how to work with some elementals, that if we get influenced by, for example, fear, that we will try to go out and heal someone, save someone. We're not saying that there is something incorrect in trying to bring heal to someone. However, we cannot forget the words of Samael when he tells us that behind every prayer we can find the essence of delinquency. That happens for as long as we have our ego. It is perfectly fine for us to work and seek to bring happiness, joy, alleviate the pain and the suffering of others. But we also have to keep in perspective that many people are experiencing what they are experiencing because of the decree of the archons of karma. And if that is the case, and we are sending out elemental forces to change something that the archons of karma had determined that needs to happen, then we're operating against the will of the law. And if we are moved by fear and we are creating those resistances and those interferences with the application of karma, then that is certainly a problem. So when it comes to working with these elementals, the execution of the quote unquote perfect ritual is very important. Now, at this level of study, we cannot also be confusing ourselves and say, oh, the instructor said that the ritual has to be perfect, and if it's not perfect, it's not going to work. And in that same mindset, we cannot say, oh, I heard that the instructor said that it was done different, and because you're doing it different, you're doing it wrong. Well, we're not inviting into that space of mental conflict as well. The execution of the perfect ritual is not done by us. The execution of the perfect ritual happens when the innermost is involved. When it is the innermost and when it is the elemental advocate, the ones who are doing the actual work. It is then that the ritual is perfect. And when that ritual is done like that, then everything is applied according to the will of the great law. And then we are not creating interference in the decrees of the archons of karma. There is also a mystery that has to do with the ability to deliver the exact diagnosis. And for us, that happens to be a little bit more difficult. The great masters, they have not only their extraordinary abilities, but they have the right instruments to do so. In many cases, they're great masters of medicine that they will be able just to set a crystal right on the clothes of the patient. And even though the patient may be at a long distance, they will be able to tell what is actually happening with them. They will be able to tell what is the problem and where is the problem in the body. That is so much better than what our instrumentation can do today. So when it comes to the deliverance of the exact diagnosis, for as long as we are unable to see the thing itself, friends, for as long as we only continue seeing the appearance of things, for as long as we continue influenced either by our pride, our fear, or perhaps our attachments, our vision will continue to be blurred, and we may think that the person is suffering of something in particular, and we may issue the wrong diagnosis, and we may offer them the incorrect solution. For us to avoid that, it is important that we not only learn how to work with the great masters of medicine, it's important that we learn to write a letter to the Temple of Alden, that temple of universal medicine, so that we can have the great masters being the ones exercising the diagnosis, helping us and healing us. That is what we would be better off doing. And in that light, with those people that we may want to work with, it would then be in our best interest to also teach them how to do that. But let's keep this in mind. We have to love our innermost just as much as we need to love the innermost of our neighbor. We have to acknowledge that each one of us is going through various degrees of difficulties, through many challenges that to the naked eye, they're completely invisible. We have to allow the deliverance of the exact diagnosis to take place from the ones who are the great masters of medicine. This is why we need to awaken those faculties of imagination and inspiration and intuition. And for us to be able to execute the perfect ritual, we have to keep in mind that it is the innermost. It is the elemental advocate, the one who is capable of doing the ritual exactly as it is meant to happen. We are here only as mere apprentices. So let's not, under any circumstances, allow any small victories just to get to our head, because that would be just our pride incorrectly translating those external impressions. Very well. So as we are speaking about the work with elementals, we can help bring healing to others' suffering when we work with elementals. And to understand exactly what is it that we can do as we are working with the elemental forces of nature, it is important that we learn what are the 5 causes of illness. We cover in much detail each one of these causes. We have one lecture dedicated to each one of these. But for the sake of this lecture, and for those of you, your benefit, those of you who have not gone through that material yet, let it suffice by saying that there are 5 distinct causes of illness. Those are the entity of God, the ens Dei, the ens naturae, which is the entity of nature, the ens spiritual, which is the entity of the essence of the elementals, the ens veneri, that is associated with our relationships and the intimate connections that we create with others, intimate at a level of intimacy, not intimate at a level of just sharing secrets, and then the ens astral, which is rooted in the very same astral light. These 5 causes are behind each and every one of the illnesses that we may experience. For example, the ens Dei is directly associated to the application of karma. The ens naturae, the ens spiritual, it has to do with working with specific forces of nature, working with distinct elementals. Ens veneri has to do with the consequences of our promiscuity, of our abusing of our creative waters. And the ens astral considers the astral light and sees the astral light exactly as it is, that for us, it would be equivalent to the amniotic fluid as it pertains to the fetus, because each one of us is submerged within the astral light. And in this astral light, everything can come to manifest and come to life. So when we're working with elementals, this is not just us going to the store, maybe going to the botany, perhaps going to the supermarket in the organic produce section, and just gathering pieces of dried plants and herbs, and maybe grabbing some flowers and some leaves, and just bringing them back and grinding them and boiling them and giving them for someone to drink. It doesn't work like that. Because the cadaver of the plant, even though it is impregnated with the anemic substance of the elemental itself, the cadaver does not have the ability to enable life. The cadaver may have some chemicals within it that may be of use to the human machine. It may have some substances that as we drink it, the intelligences of the body may be able to extract them and get benefit from them. But the cadaver of the plant itself does not help us to enable life. What helps us is the anemic essence, the soul of the plant. It is the elemental, because those elementals, they have the very same powers of our divine Mother Nature. So now that you are hearing this, now that you're seeing that it is not us, that it is the work through the innermost, now that you're hearing that we have many limitations that have to do with the incorrect filtering that our ego does to our external circumstances, now that you see that this is not a matter of just going out there ordering stuff through the internet and giving it to someone, you can tell that this science is not for everyone. This is science that is not particularly for those who want everything now. I want to drink it now because I want to feel better now. It doesn't work like that. Because the consequences that we are experiencing are the result of many repeated instances of previous bad behaviors. You see, as our father used to tell us, we cannot talk ourselves out of the things that we behave ourselves into. So this requires of patience. It requires of us to be able to endure some discomfort and endure some sacrifices. Because what is happening today to us is nothing more than the collective consequences of the many wrongdoings that we have done in the past. So as we are working with elementals, as we are working with their bodies, we are indeed operating with physical forms. And we have to be very cognizant that what we are doing is not just cutting, boiling, or cutting and infusing and giving it for somebody to drink. We are not just taking things and throwing them in a mortar and grinding them and mixing them with oils to create some kind of balm and slapping it on someone's extremity or over someone's organ. That is not it. Botany and allopathic medicine will do just that. They will cut out and they will try to use the chemical essences that exist there, and they will try to deliver some treatment. And we must admit, in many cases, they have brought relief. Everyone who is approaching the idea of alleviating the suffering of others with a kind and noble heart, the great law looks into that favorably. But we cannot just cut, grind, boil, mix, and go treat just like that. Because we cannot forget that if there are karmic elements in place that we would be completely unaware of, we would be indeed creating an interference with the decrees of the great law. And friends, every time that we're interfering with that divine will, that is black magic. We just cannot keep adding more into our own karma. So when it comes to working with these physical forms, let's keep in mind that that body of the plant that you have in your hand, the roots, the stem, the leaves, the flowers, the buds, the seeds, all of that, those are just the physical bodies of the plants. What is of our interest is to be able to work with those physical bodies, but directly with the essence of the plant itself. We want to be able to work directly with the powers, the faculties, and the virtues of those discrete elementals. Because when we create those connections, we start returning back to the wonders of nature. Friends, the moment that we start working with the elementals in this way that is so superior, we start seeing life in every breath that we take. We start seeing the essence of life in every gulp that we consume, everywhere we go. So we have to not only return to the wonders of nature on a physical way, we have to be able to reconnect with nature in ways that are deeply emotional, of the superior emotional kind, and of course, deeply intellectual, meaning of the superior intellectual kind. Our societal ties are just a significant limiter for us to be able to do that. Because the fact of the matter is that today we all live in ways that are very unnatural. We not only live via unnatural means of living, our lives are indeed unnatural. There are many cases that many of us are waking up early in the morning, and the moment that we wake up, we just bolt out of bed like a lightning because we are already late. You see, we have been trying to have our body recover and restore itself with the period of that physical sleep at night. But by the moment that we open our eyes, we are already running at 100 miles an hour, fully stressed out, wondering that we're going to get late, not even having a good meal for breakfast, not keeping the body hydrated. And not only we're starting the day like that, the moment that we start bringing in nourishment and ingest of all those food stuff to be able to keep the body in good condition, the amount of artificial materials, components, chemistries just going into the body and into the bloodstream, they put a tremendous amount of strain and stress in the body itself. And if on top of that, we are consistently eating stuff that may taste phenomenal, but that has no nutritional value at all, then we're indeed even pushing the boundaries, pushing the capabilities of the body to the point where the body is eventually going to be extenuated. That's part of our unnatural means of living. But it is not only that. It is also the conditions in which we live. Where we live in homes that they are stacked next to each other. Perhaps we may live in apartment complexes where we may have people on top, below, to the sides, in front of us. And when that happens, then we immerse ourselves in areas where those mental vibrations are very dense. Because let's do this mental experiment for a second. Close your eyes. See yourself that you are immersed in an ocean. Imagine of yourself being fully transparent. And nevertheless, you can still perceive and see yourself. In that transparency, see yourself being part of those waters. As you imagine yourself in those crystalline waters, as you imagine yourself being part of that environment, fully transparent. Now imagine that you are surrounded by countless other people who are also transparent, within that very same ocean of life. And the beautiful thing is that for as long as we use our objective imagination to see that, we can see that that is a beautiful scene. But now imagine that someone close to you pollutes the waters. And imagine, use your objective imagination to see that as we are all submerged within that ocean of life, that there is someone close to us who pollutes the waters. Use your objective imagination to see how those waters may turn dark brown, perhaps like sewage, with things that other people may say. And now imagine yourself contributing in the same way, where your thoughts and your actions are also adding into the pollution of that ocean of life. And now let's try to make a little bit more effort, because by now it must be getting difficult for you to continue visualizing. And let's imagine that everybody else is also polluting that ocean of life with their inferior thoughts, with their inferior emotions, with their inferior words. And it is likely that now that beautiful transparent ocean in which we were all submerged no longer looks transparent. It is likely that now it may look brown and red. Can you see that? So allow yourself to come back to the lecture. This is exactly what happens to us. We may not see it with our eyes, but it is very common for people to walk into areas and feel that the environment is so dense, that things feel heavy, that the atmosphere feels so dense that you would prefer to not even be there. And that is all the result of being stacked and crammed on each other. That is all the result of the collective contribution of all of those negative emotions, all of those ill wills, many of those inferior thoughts that have to do with rage and anger. They have to do with resentments. Thoughts have to do with judgments and criticisms. And when we live like that, our problems and our fears affect everyone around us just as much as we get affected by the fears, by the desires of everyone else. And as a consequence, our suffering becomes someone else's suffering. On the same turn, everyone else's suffering becomes part of us as well. And before long, and for as long as you remain aware enough, you will start noticing that there are thoughts that come into the screen of your mind, that all of a sudden you see them there, and they evoke reactions on you, but you know that those thoughts are not yours. And it is likely that this may have happened to you. As you walk outside, you come across your neighbor, and they tell you something that may be happening to them that is directly related to those thoughts that you just experienced. And that happens when we cannot escape the arguments that are happening next door, the quarrels that are happening across the street, the inferior passions and the brutal manifestations of lust that may be happening on the house next to you, on the apartment next to you. That all affects us. It creates an environment populated with larvae that would make the conditions more difficult for everyone. And when we add into that all of the other external influences, the neighbor with the music that is too loud, or the teenager across the street that likes to rev the vehicle and just do burnouts, or whether it is the dogs barking or the neighbor that criticizes the other and that we judge them, etc., etc. All of that, it creates a series of very undesirable circumstances. Now the thing is that in our fanatical beliefs, we fail to see how is it that we contribute into that picture. And it requires of us to operate in ways that are superior. It requires of us right action, right thought. It requires of us right sentiment so that we can help others make a change as well. But the thing is that for others to change, the change that we would like to see in others has to come from ourselves first. So our fanaticism thrives and delights in all of this technology that we have today, in all of this modern day science that is void of human principles. All of these so-called miracles of technology that they are void of natural principles. If anything, all that we have been able to do is create instrumentation that magnifies our five senses so that we can see into the infinitely small, so that we can perceive those things that the eyes and the ears of the flesh cannot perceive. And with that, we have learned how to replicate the mechanical laws of nature at microscopic levels so that we can see then the phenomena of technology, of the electric vehicles, of the flights that happen out into the vastness of space, into even playing and altering the genetic code of many organisms. See, all that we have learned to do is to continue applying the mechanical laws of nature down into the infinitely small. So we have to make an internal change. And the change is looking at bringing us back to reconnecting to the streams of nature. Because nature offers us food, nature gives us shelter, and nature also gives us wisdom. Different than this artificial environment that we have created, nature has no political and no financial systems. Nature has a basic economy that must be satisfied. And to satisfy that need of nature, there is that cosmic law of the cosmic trogo autoegocrat. But in nature, everything is harmonious. The economy of nature is based on equanimity. It is based on seeking what is mutually beneficial and mutually satisfying, where every component of that big system serves their own particular vocation. We as humans have become that discordant note, and thus we must make a change. Filippo Theophrastus Bombastus Aureola Paracelsus, in his writings, the Parami Prologue number 3, he says, such medics are known as spiritual because they command the spirits of the herbs and plants, and they command the liberation of the ill who are imprisoned. In that light, a judge who incarcerates a man is also his medic because he holds the keys that once again can set him free. Hippocrates belong to these types of medics. Paracelsus is known as the father of medicine. And he is making a reference here to those medics who are known as spiritual because they command the spirits of the herbs and the plants. Because they command the liberation of the ill, those who are in prison. And he shares this with us because we need a particular fundamental education. In our level of ignorance, we may be able to see someone who looks a certain way. Perhaps we can create a mental image of that stereotypical spiritualist. Somebody with their long robes and their very gracious walking, their calm voice. And we can see how they may walk around and extend their hands to people and perhaps pull out a little bag out of their sachet and just give it to someone, and someone drinks something and feel better, etc. And we may think that that person automatically is a superior being, that they are a quote unquote master, that they have powers, that they have dominion over the forces of nature. And even though that may be true to the eye, we still have to be very watchful. Because in days like today, now that we are here living at the end of times, there are many of those falsifiers of metals. And Samael warns us about this. He even shares with us an instant in which he was within the higher planes of creation, and he walked himself into a temple that was beautifully adorned, a temple that had a man standing in front of the audience with a beautifully chiseled nose, with a long forehead, long hairs, speaking beautiful words, speaking of love, and even mentioning the name of the Christ. And nevertheless, the moment that Samael exclaimed within that recent, and he said, "Long live the Christ," everyone turned around to look at him, and he said that all of their exemplary, beautiful faces, that those beautiful countenances just faded away, that they all looked like demons. And even though they were speaking of the Christ, and even though they were speaking of love, he came to realize that he had walked into a temple of black magic. So we must be very careful, because things are not always what they seem to be. And Samael gives us an additional hint. He tells us that anything that is not directed down the path of the elimination of the ego, of being born out of fire and water and sacrificing for others, is simply black magic. If it is inviting to use of our creative waters for something other than transmutation and the transformation of man, it is indeed black magic, regardless of how nice to the ear it may be. So let's keep an eye on that. And thus, these are the great words of the master Paracelsus. But Franz Hartmann, he tells us as well, the true medic is not a product of any scientific school. He becomes that because of the very light of divine wisdom. So in Franz Hartmann words, what we see here is that the medic, the true one, is nothing more but a fine and delicate instrument at the service of the innermost. So knowing that for us to be able to work with these elemental forces of nature, we need to seek to become a conduit of that being. We have to seek to have our consciousness have the strongest connection possible to its own monad. Knowing that we must be watchful as we seek to imitate, and as we get shocked with the presence and the works and the words of others, that we have to be very savvy, because things are not always what they seem to be. We also have to start breaking down all of these hypnotic considerations, all of these fixed ideas that we have about others. Because it is clear that we all have one thing in common. It is clear that we are all seeking to alleviate our suffering, that we all want happiness. This is what we long for. And in that quest for happiness, we end up looking at theologians. And we see them because they say that they have a theology degree and that they know about Christianity and this and that. And we have even come to learn from very close friends that as they ask them, oh, what did you learn about the Eastern religions? They say, oh, nothing. Well, wait. So what did you learn about Christianity? Oh, nothing. So what did you learn about? They come back to say it is a theology degree, but focused only in one or maybe two doctrines. And we know that that is a perfect example of imbalanced teaching. So when it comes to theologians, even though they may come to us being perfectly able to dominate the literature, let's keep in mind that for the most part, they know nothing of God. For the most part, they see God as this old man who lives up there somewhere between the darkness of space and above the clouds. That is an old man with some long beard that if you do not please, that he will threaten you with eternal damnation. That cannot be our consideration of God, because we know that God exists within every breath that we take. It exists as part of every intelligence in nature. We know that God manifests itself in 10 distinct ways along all those 10 different planes of the tree of life. But then sometimes we try to seek refuge in doctors when we are vulnerable and fearful because of the many attachments that we have. And then when it comes to doctors, they may know a lot from what they did learn at school. Many of them, they come to us and they leave the skin every day just doing their very best to help people. And we all know that we are very grateful for that. But there are also doctors that they may know about medications, but they know nothing about medicine. And they do not understand how is it that things work. And in many cases, there are doctors out there that they would have been great lawyers. Maybe they would have been great engineers. Nevertheless, they are doctors. As we keep going and looking at the many others that fall within the hypnotic fallacy of our considerations, we can see anthropologists, and they dedicate their lives into the study of cultures and the study of man. And at the end of the day, they know about artifacts, and they may know about writings and sayings, but they know nothing about human nature in all of its manifestations. We may see some lawyers who have no sentiment at all, who have no empathy at all. Lawyers who are incapable of showing kindness, who know nothing of justice. There are many judges out there who do not know anything about a perfect balance between mercy and justice. There are many judges that they can behave like despots, and others who play and tilt the plates of the scale depending on who they are dealing with. Friends, just like that, there are many governors who have never even learned to govern and dominate their own passions. There are many priests, pastors, who are out there taking advantage of the weakness and the fragility of the human condition. There are many Christians who claim to have deep, profound values, and at every moment, they are betraying the Master. The shelter and the security that we are seeking is only available through our interaction with the innermost. And what that means is that the only way that we can defend ourselves from all of these things that are threatening us constantly is by having a pure and noble heart. Because Samael tells us there is no best defense than a tranquil heart. Now that we have seen to different degrees and perspectives. All of these challenges that we are facing within the fragility of our own mind, within the weaknesses that we deal with in our human condition. We have been given the opportunity to once again receive this wisdom. Samael has torn the veil of gnosis, and he has given us this so that we can break away from this mechanicity of life, and that we can once again reconnect with these superior powers of nature. When we work with elementals, let's keep in mind that these elementals have the very same powers of the divine mother of the world. They may be innocent. Their vocation is to work with the humans. Their vocation is to put to practice the mastery that they are seeking to achieve. And in their innocence, they cannot discern between one human who is seeking to be working with superior forces through the divine mother, through the innermost. And they cannot do anything about receiving negative influences from someone who wants to use them to do harm. Because in their innocence, all that they want, all that they are longing for, is serving others. The Hermetic principle of polarity, the one that tells us that everything has its two opposites, and that these opposites must be reconciled, is one of those 7 Hermetic principles that applies beautifully to this doctrine of the elemental therapy. Because on one extreme of this continuum, we have the force of the spirit. And on the other hand, we have the physical manifestation. You see, on one side, we have the dense matter, and on the other one, we have the source of the energy. And matter and energy always have to be connected. One cannot exist without the other. And thus, these two must be reconciled. But what we must keep in mind is that the source of the power of nature does not come from the physicality. It is true that if you're ever going to work with an agave and you're dealing with one of those agaves, like the ones that exist in the lands of Tula and Teotihuacan, agaves that are 12 feet tall, 4 meters, those are certainly very mature elementals. Those elementals are very powerful. But there are also elementals of plants that are small and fragile, and who are just as powerful as they are. So let's not fool ourselves and say, I'm not going to work with that because this plant is, it looks too little or too delicate. You see, the source of the power is not from the physicality. Our own mental systems mislead us. Our constant comparisons are the ones that have been leading us to failure, life after life. So let's keep in mind that as we are working with elementals, we seek to work with that energetic side of the matter. And thus, our thoughts have an influence over that. What we are seeking to do when we work with elementals is that we can bring superior willpower into action. That we can bring the intervention of our innermost so that as things manifest and crystallize according to the will of the law, that then they are dressed with the beauty and the faculties of the innermost. So friends, we have to seek continual contact with nature. Now that we know about our fragility, now that we know better about the our mental condition, about the external influences that we're experiencing with the dramas at school, the conflicts at work, the expectations of society, the false values of the education system, and all of these things, we do ourselves a great service every time that we can spend some time out in the wilderness, where we can spend time with plants, when we can help heal other animals. Because as we do that, we start learning to see life. We start creating connections with nature that at some point we forgot about. When that starts happening, the moment that we're able to grab some wild berries and enjoy them, we start coming to see life in a different perspective. We start seeing that essence of life in every breath that we take, in the shades of color at every sunset, the aroma of the flowers, the water that we drink. We must seek for that contact, because in today's language, I guess that means we need to reground ourselves. And as we become more in contact with these forces of nature, we become more able to penetrate into many of these beautiful temples of medicine. These are temples and these are great masters that are waiting to be able to help us. But they cannot do that until we deliberately ask for their help and their support. And Samael comes to open our eyes when he shares with us this information in his book of occult medicine and practical magic. He says they're not only just European and Asian masters. He says there are plenty of masters. The thing is that we need to learn as students to align ourselves to the right ray of wisdom. Because different of us, we have different degrees of affinity. And some of you may be holding more affinity towards the ray of wisdom of the Maya. And some of you may have stronger affinity with the ray of wisdom of the Aztecs. And some of you may be more aligned to the ray of wisdom of the Buddhist tradition, or maybe the Hindi tradition. So we must learn to find which one is that for us. And Samael, as he addressed the audience when he shared this, he is speaking to people who were natives of Central America. They're natives of these lands where the ancient Atlanteans used to roam. And he says again, they're not just European Asian masters, there are many other masters. And he shares this information with us. He says, let's start with Kaluswanga. Kaluswanga is the ancient primitive god of the light. He is the master of the seven rays. And Kaluswanga, he will come to admit within his very own temple those souls who are thirsty for wisdom, particularly those souls who are akin to the Maya ray of wisdom. And Kaluswanga, he gives everyone, he gives Samael, and Samael then unveils for everyone a very specific practice that you can do to walk into his temple. And friends, we invite you to do this practice. Give yourself the opportunity. Maybe in our fanaticism, we're thinking, I am of the ray of wisdom of the Egyptians, or I am of the ray of wisdom of the ancient Celtics, or I am of the, everybody wants to be whatever. Give yourself an opportunity. Because in this practice, as Samael says, he says, the Master Kaluswanga gave me this key to walk into his temple, and he said, as a disciple, sit on a chair right there on a table and set your elbows on the table and hold your head with your left hand. You see? Sit on a chair, rest your elbows on a table, you lay your head on your left hand, and on your and use your right hand so that you can do magnetic passes over your head from your forehead all the way back to the base of the head. And do this with the purpose of magnetizing yourself and to throw your astral body outside of your physicality in the direction of the temple of Buritaka. Because the temple of Buritaka is the foundation of the ancient wisdom of the Ray of the Maya. Listen to that again. Sit on a chair facing a table. We would encourage you to face east when you're doing this. As your elbows are resting on the table, rest your head on your left hand. And with your right hand, do magnetic passes from your forehead to the base of your head and your neck and in the back. And do these passes so that you can magnetize yourself and that you can throw your astral body outside of your physicality. Samael says, unite your willpower with your objective imagination. Bring them together in vibrant harmony and put some effort so that you can lull yourself. Samael continues by saying, feel yourself making use of your willpower and your imagination as if you were in flesh and bone right there at the temple of Buritaka. Something is going to happen when you're doing this exercise. And evidently, you will start experiencing images. And those images will appear spontaneously within the eye of your mind. And you would do yourself a great service if you open yourself to that which is new and you embrace those spontaneous images. Because the innermost communicates in ways that are spontaneous. If you think that in your head you're going to be having this conversation with your innermost and you're going to tell him things and he's going to tell things back and then you're going to laugh and high fives, you are fantasizing. The innermost will communicate with you until you have awakened that consciousness in ways that are spontaneous. And you need to be watchful of that. Because if you are not, your mind is going to tell you that can't be it. Or are you sure it was that? Maybe it wasn't. Or that doesn't look like the place that I would like to be. This is what the mind does. Don't waste your opportunity. As you are seeing those images come spontaneously, see yourself like you are there in flesh and bone. Unify your willpower with your objective imagination. And Samael says, with your thought, chant the mantra Omnis Baum Igneos. It sounds like this. Omnis Baum Igneos. Allow the sound of all those vowels and repeat that until you allow your physical body to fall asleep. Friends, before long, you will notice that you will be leaving behind your physical body. You will be out in your astral body, and the Master Kaluswanga, he will be instructing you in his mysteries, and he will share with you all of this beautiful wisdom of medicine. So you have nothing to lose, everything to gain. There are many other great masters. There's Kunchuito Maya. There's Cacacintana, nuestro Seyanqua, nuestro Padre Secuel, Mamacaso Viscunde, Mama Batunare. There's Saga Maria Pastora, the Master of Wisdom. There's the god Quimaya, the god of the tempests and the seasons. And there's the god Temblor. Samael says that we don't have to invoke because he is like a little child and he's the one responsible for the manifestation of all these earthquakes. So there are all of these great masters and they can help us, but they need of us to ask for the help. And we have an opportunity here. So let's go ahead and bring our lecture tonight to an end. Now that we shared with you that practice from the Master Kaluswanga, when we are going to be doing invocations, we always want to work with our innermost. And so we will always stand facing east. And we will put our hands on our chest, the right one over the left. We will seek to achieve a deep state of relaxation of our body. And that is important because when the body is calm and the emotions are calm, the intellect also calms down. And in that, we maintain a deep remembrance of self. What that means is that we have to keep in mind that we are a consciousness incarnated that is currently experiencing this handicap of the ego, and that we are in reality insignificant. That we need to strive to become a delicate instrument, an extension of our innermost. And in gratitude and gratefulness for that new opportunity, concentrate on the heart. Remember that we have a direct connection into our heart where that atom nous exists directly to the atom of the sun that exists within our pituitary gland. So concentrate on the heart. Don't forget that in the heart, we also have the beautiful temple of the goddess Kakini. And as we concentrate in our heart, those beautiful forests and those eagles flying, those stormy clouds that move aggressively in that sky, as we can see that beautiful temple that exists within that deep jungle in the heart, invoke of your innermost. Call upon your Divine Father. Ask your innermost to assist you, to give you the wisdom to understand. Perhaps beyond understanding, the wisdom to comprehend without the need to reason. Ask of your innermost to open your mind, to open your heart, to allow you to remember that we get out of these practices the same thing that we bring into them. Bring love and kindness, empathy, equanimity, harmony. We walk out with beautiful knowledge. When we bring with skepticism, with comparisons, with doubts, we leave empty-handed. Let's ask of this to our innermost. And as the days go by, observe the small changes in your life, and you will see the magic manifest within you. We're very grateful to all the sources out of which we were able to get these pictures and put this material together for you. So, dear friends, this has been our lecture part 2 on elemental therapy as we speak of the magic of nature. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, and may all beings be happy.